So, continuing on with Consider the Lobster, I'll try to make this one shorter. I did go on a kind of a tangent or pretty kind of um, over the top, kind of convoluted tangent that, and then eventually the battery, well, not the battery, but my phone ran out of space. So, anyway, I think I had left off, I was talking about the essay on usage, I think. Um, and I think he covered different things. Like he mentioned, like he went, as far as I know, he did mention, like, I think Chomsky's and Steven Pinker's kind of view on language being kind of in a prescriptive, I don't know if it was descriptive, or in the way that Chomsky, I think, might have been a little bit close to Wittgenstein's, but I'm not too sure on the exact details of that linguistics. But yeah, he did mention ebonics, though. Like, he said that he was talking about how he disagreed that um, that people were making out like the kind of, like, kind of more privileged white male kind of as to be like elitist kind of standard kind of traditional English way of teaching. And Wallace wanted, he felt like he didn't have any, you know which is why some people might claim him as like a kind of a conservative voice or whatever, but I don't really see that. I just see it like as a kind of he's just kind of prescriptive grammarist kind of inclinations kind of showing through there. But yeah, he was talking about how ebonics was, he wouldn't have much, like, he wouldn't be able to respect himself if he kind of undersold people, like, just on account of the race, just like saying that, like, I'm not gonna try to do this truncated version of English just because somebody talked like that, in this time, and like, but there's a reason why, like, there's a reason why standard American English like has come to this consensus. It's not by like accident, I don't think so. But yeah, so on that was the view from Mrs. Thompson's, where Wallace talks about the September 11th attacks, and who was back home in Illinois, and he was at the time he was teaching a class. I don't know if it's creative English, but he or creative writing, and he was at he was talking about how they all kind of solemnly heard about it, and in Union kind of all were like quietly, like, he stayed at one of his, I think, his neighbor's house, who was Mrs. Thompson, and that, they all went to churches, and, they were all like, kind of classic kind of, Midwestern American Christians, and they all had, middle class or working American people, they and they heard about the terrorist attacks, and they all kind of were, there's a quiet atmosphere. The way that Wallace describes it was very like solemn and quiet, but it wasn't, people weren't overreacting or being like super over the top about it. People weren't reactionary and inflammatory or hatred or anything. If they were hiding it really well. But I like how Wallace points out that there was a like a kind of, this definitely a like melancholy atmosphere, but it was like just a calm, like, kind of the kind of demeanor that everybody had. Like, everybody was just like, like, in it together, like. But anyway, so then after that was How Tracy Austin Broke My Heart, and that was about a tennis prodigy, really. Tracy Austin talking, it's basically her autobiography. And he starts talking about how, this is one of my favorites, because he talks about how it was generated, and it was like this book was solely made for the purpose of kind of just, in this, I think it was pretty sure this one was ghostwritten, so he was like critiquing it on that account too. But the fact that so many kind of mass media put this out, and like in the sphere, for it's not really out there for the point of readers, not readers like the way that Wallace is, not in the way that Wallace writes to his readers, because like tennis, for him, it's like tennis is like important, like he grew up with it, it's a sport and hobby that he prides himself in to a certain extent. He did competitive championships and all that, but then but some people said that he had, or one of his coaches said he had a bit of an overactive brain, I think, in one of his interviews. But either way, whatever the fact is that he kind of fell out of, the greatness of being pro tennis. And although I'm sure he still had some ability, even like maybe till middle age. But I think like this but he's still not writing, like, for example, in Infinite Jest, he's not right, like, there's a tennis undercurrent, like there's a side plot involving tennis, but it's not like Wallace is writing for the sole purpose of like just capturing that audience. And but yeah, as highfalutin as it sounds, like this, it's meant for a particular kind of in-group of readers. And Tracy Austin meant to just kind of make it like this kind of forcibly almost happy-go-lucky kind of contrived sappiness of just like then I went to this championship, and then I went to this, and then it turned out that I lost this one, then I went to this. It's just very, there's nothing kind of more than matter of fact, kind of bare bones account of her life, which is fine. But it's one of those things where it came off as inauthentic. I think it came off as like trying to be something it wasn't, like trying to which in a way, because like if it's not authentically written by the actual author, then it just doesn't really square with people like who read for beyond just kind of like the surface level recreation. So the one after that was Up Simba, and this is about John McCain's 2000 presidential election campaign. And then he was, I believe this was for the Rolling Stone, and they had him on a bus with McCain, and he talks about kind of a interestingly how he tried to give him. I love how Wallace gave him a very, very fair account, like a very balanced, impartial, kind of dispassionate look into John McCain's like campaign. That actually rhymed. And how that yeah, it's interesting because I didn't know that he ran in 2000. I knew he ran before, but yeah, I'm just aware of up until the 2008 one. But yeah, he had all these kind of like, he had a bus called the Straight Talk Express, and he was like very just like, let's just get to the point. And kind of like your classic kind of almost moderate conservative, like McCain never came off as like extremist in my mind. But yeah, he talks about how despite all his kind of whatever differences you might feel, that distance between the politician guy doing this thing and you, and like how the regular kind of popular sovereign, you're making up like how little we can relate to this guy running for president. Whatever it was, like he talked about, he gave some context for his respect for McCain, which was like his in the late 60s, I think, early 70s, or right in the height of the Vietnam War. McCain was held captive by Viet Cong. I don't know, I forgot all the exact details, but like the extent of the torture was so severe. It was for like a good few months. It might have been 6 months, upward to 6 months. I could be totally wrong, but yeah, that it was very long and extensive. And if it wasn't, it probably felt that long, because he was like kept there, and he was whipped, and he was like every kind of tormenting kind of pain imaginable, like the most execrable, like eviscerating kind of just like every like second he was like being like hit or punched, or and on account of under the pretext of trying to release some information that he had, because his father too, I think McCain's father also was in the military as a higher ranking guy, so they thought they'd have some kind of thing about like the military campaign or whatever. But yeah, but he talks about how like literally at one point I think McCain he still had like stitches, or he still had struggling with one of his wounds, which was like them hitting him in his private parts over and over again, and that he still had kind of a not a lag, but kind of a and I don't know why I'm blanking on the word. He still had remnants and signs of this past kind of thing, and he like lived, and basically like he was talking about, like no matter what you think about his politics, like you have to respect the guy for sustaining that kind of terror, like that kind of uh, exhaustive amount of like grueling torment. Um, but anyway, so that and I'm trying to think of other things. Like he said, it was like kind of a thing where McCain was like not your classic kind of conservative old grandpa, but he had kind of like almost like a slight playboy kind of thing to him, like talking about like all the women he's been with and stuff like that. Like he's just kind of more relatable, I guess. So after that's considered Lobster, the title one, probably the most famous, one of his most famous essays, and he talks about how um, he goes to the Maine Lobster Festival, and he talks about the kind of morality of boiling live lobster in and like how much pain, and he like goes into the kind of nitty gritty like details about how much these boiled like lobsters are like how they're like down to their neurons and exact things, because lobsters are very sensorial creatures, like they're like crustacean type. I don't know beyond that, but I know that they're very their sensors and stuff. Sense organs are like all these different places that have um which is why they have these like shells and stuff. They have in the same way that turtles have shells and other things. But like I think like the main thing with lobsters is despite those shells, it's like it's one thing for them to have to be like hit or like to be crushed or whatever, be it accidental or whatever. If you're a Janus type of person who's like just like no type of thing at all, but it's kind of what I got from Wallace. But I think he was saying that it's another thing to boil them alive and like the sheer amount of pain that you must be. So yeah, which is why if you're like vegan, it makes sense to, or if you're, it makes almost sense to if you're against this to kind of follow the vegan diet, because the amount of pain and just stimuli and the amount of um, like different kind of pains that animals go through in general to make up our meat and stuff, to do that. It makes sense to at least be a vegetarian, just because. So after that was Joseph Frank's Dostoevsky. He was talking about the uh, scholar, and like who wrote like a massive biography, very exhaustive and cohesive one of Dostoevsky, and how I I could be wrong, but I think Joseph Frank is not still alive, or he didn't die too long ago. So it's relatively kind of in the I think it was like a multiple volume thing. I still haven't read it. I still want to read it, but I'm still a little bit intimidated by it. But he yeah, I think he's like a leading expert on Dostoevsky, so he had a lot to say about and he was talking about how Dostoevsky's type of writing style was a little bit confused for being flamboyant or stylistic, whereas I think it was down to, according to Frank, I think it actually was down attributed to the translator's kind of dilemma and predicament of being authentic and true to the original text, and like translating that, the not only just the like the word, like the dictation, there's much more of that, because Dostoevsky dictated his work to his wife, a stenographer. Well, one of his wives, or one of his stenographers became his wife, Anna Grigorovich, and she was the one that really got him to turn away from gambling and all these other kind of very kind of cyclical, circuitous addictions that he had, and he finally kind of like committed himself to her, and like he had a turnaround in his life. And some people say that's like almost like a similar thing with Wallace, is that he had like numerous kind of ways that he treated women in the past that were awful, to say the least, and lining on the abusive, like just physically and mental to people, But in the last 10 years or so of his life, I think, from like, I want to say like 98 to 2008, I think he married, I can't remember, it was a visual, I think it was Karen Green, I think her name is, and she's like a visual artist. They had a quiet marriage. He committed himself to, he gave up, all these different vices, and gave up like different, I think it was fully clean, of these things. And that's like, I just thought that was an interesting kind of parallel. Anyway, but yeah, he talks about, Dostoevsky having a bit of a flair, a stylistic streak, and how, like, there being such, like, like a kind of, uh, like celebratory almost type of maudlin type of thing, with like how, like Nastasia Filippinova, like how, the beauty of Nastasia, and how much it was, like how pretty much getting reacted to that, and it was a little bit over the top. But you have to understand the time of the aristocracies, and these Russian general, these kind of dandified kind of households led by military men. I think it was like the military generals were the ones that held supreme, I think, in Russia's during that time of like around serfdom, in post, maybe even post serfdom, I'd say. Um, so yeah, so but he talks about how, in a similar way to his critique of Kafka, like he talks about how earnest Dostoevsky was, that he was quite sincere, that he was prided himself in a kind of as trying to be the panacea against irony, and like just overly nihilistic, the intrigue and the machinations of nihilism at the time, which is very seductive, and it kind of regaled people into this lifestyle that really, like Targanov made clear as well, really kind of is just life denying. Like it makes you not take this life seriously. Like it's just like it makes you willing to kind of do anything to get your point across. So yeah, after that, the essay Host is the last one, and it's a profile of John Ziegler, who's this very obnoxious Los Angeles-based talk show guy that also had a fixation on the O.J. Simpson case, and he is talking about how he's like a pundit, kind of in the similar vein of Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck, I guess, or what's Sean Hannity, that kind of like old kind of thing where I remember getting up in the morning at early 2000s, like from like 2003 to 2009 or so, especially with like the Obama campaign and stuff, like how every single one of them was like always in the morning, just because the household I'd listened to was pretty conservative, so I had my fair share of listening to those very annoying voices. But yeah, they he's talking about how the kind of things that John Ziegler was using to kind of win, using to kind of like tricks and like kind of little tactics to kind of stew up. Like he realized that basically nobody's gonna listen to you if you're not super polarizing, you're not super like obnoxious, and not if you're not pointing out stuff and you're not constantly irritating people. It's like any kind of press is good press, so it's like it doesn't matter if it's bad or not. It doesn't matter if you're kind of talking about something that's really negative, like O.J. Simpson, or what Rush Limbaugh kept talking about with talking about that one girl on birth control, just constantly just recycling it over and over again, because it's like a feeding cycle. It's like a feeding frenzy of just what pundit can get to the juiciest story first, and you have to be very, I feel like as a pundit, you have to be very flamboyant, like Tucker Carlson kind of thing. Like, and it's interesting because I saw John Ziegler, and he maybe it's just because I wasn't able to find anything on YouTube, at least prior to 2000, like 15 or something. But yeah, I think I looked up some of the stuff from maybe his Fox News appearance, and he was like a little bit less obnoxious than I thought he was going to be. I thought he was going to be like a lot more like just kind of rude, and kind of just like dominating the conversation, but I didn't get that sense. But he did seem like quite outspoken. But maybe it's just like he just changed. I guess I'm not sure, but I do remember looking that up shortly after I read this, out of curiosity. Not to say that Wallace did him any disservice, or like didn't, or painted him in an inauthentic light, but I think maybe at that point he was trying. I think like definitely in like the early 2000s. Um, I think this was April. This was 2005. Yeah. Um, a lot of these people, like especially post 9/11, had to be jumping on, being like as loud and opportunistic as possible to get their voice across. Because it gets lost in everything else. So you have to like. I think it's like the loudest voice wins. It's like a kind of the old truth of the matter. So yeah, that is my review of David Foster Wallace's Consider the Lobster. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.